Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Angela Tolosa, and I am the Deputy Program Director for Reentry at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Before turning over the webinar to our featured speakers, I'd like to talk about a couple of housekeeping items. I'm going to take a brief moment to tell you about the National Reentry Resource Center. Anytime during this webinar first, you can always ask a question, big or small, by typing it into the Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We will keep a running list of the content-related questions that we receive, and then at the end of the webinar, we will ask our panelists to respond. We will do our best to get through as many questions as possible. If you encounter a technical or audio problem during the webinar, please call WebEx technical support at 1-866-229-3239. Please understand that there may be some technical issues you may not be able to resolve. For this reason, we are also recording this event, and we will be posting it on our website at www.csgjusticecenter.org, and we should have the webinar posted online within a week's time, and we will email you a link to the recording as well so you can share it with your colleagues. So the Council of State Governments Justice Center is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan association of state government officials. We work to engage members of all three levels, all three branches of state government. And in our work, we provide practical advice informed by the best available evidence and data-driven practices on criminal justice issues. So the National Reentry Resource Center has been around since 2009 and is a project of the Council of State Governments Justice Center and supported by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. You can find us again at csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC. We have worked with nearly 600 Second Chance Act grantees across the country, and we provide individualized and targeted technical assistance, training, distance learning to support Second Chance Act grantees to help them achieve on their goals. Please register if you aren't already for our monthly newsletter at csgjusticecenter.org/subscribe. It's through this link that you'll be able to get announcements about funding opportunities, about our monthly newsletter, about future webinars, and also about specific topics like reentry and employment. So please join us if you aren't already. Next slide, please. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Second Chance Act was signed into law in April 2008, and the Second Chance Act, which provides funding for initiatives like National Reentry Resource Center, as well as the technology-based career training program, authorizes grants to state, local, and tribal governments and nonprofits to support programs and practices that reduce recidivism and promote public safety. Today, our speakers for this specific solicitation webinar will be including Andre Bethea, who's Policy Advisor for Corrections at Bureau of Justice Assistance, U.S. Department of Justice. Andre has been previously a Director for Program Operations at the New York City Department of Corrections, where he managed relationships with community-based organizations and research institutions. He also has developed policy and curriculum specifically for initiatives impacting adolescents and young adults. Prior to this, he's a legal coordinator providing law library and research services for individuals in custody at DOC. Our second speaker today will be one of the policy analysts here at Council of State Governments Justice Center, Roneen Davis. Roneen Davis has previously to the Justice Center worked on the Strong Fathers, Strong Families program at SCA, a community-based organization, a national nonprofit, where he oversaw 4 community-based organizations that provided services to low-income parents. Before this, he's worked on various alternative to incarceration projects all over the city, and before that, he worked in Boulder County on their Juvenile Assessment Center in Colorado. He's also a licensed master social worker in the state of New York. So we're very excited to have them both here. At this point, I'm going to turn the slides over to Roneen to talk about the solicitation that, on technology careers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. This is an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to begin by reviewing the grant, a brief review of the grant program. We'll move into what the program's requirements and expectations are, then a little bit about the application process and selection criteria, and then resources and important contacts. We'll wrap up with a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. The goal of the Technology Career Training Program is to increase post-release employability, specifically in technology-based jobs. And the key objective toward accomplishing that goal is implementing a career training program inside a correctional or juvenile facility with extensive follow-up post-release services. You'll see on this map where other technology career training grants have been implemented across the country since they began in 2010. And this map also includes the latest cohort of technology career training grants from fiscal year 2014. Since 2010, over $19 million have been awarded to states, local governments, and tribes to support technology career training. These grants have operated in 19 states and the District of Columbia. Unique to this grant is the diversity of agencies that have been awarded these funds. Many Second Chance Act grants are awarded to governmental agencies, or many Second Chance Act grants awarded to governmental agencies go to state, county, or city governments, usually through their corrections or public safety departments, or through human service agencies. This grant has been awarded to educational agencies, employment and training departments, labor departments, and in the most recent cohort, a State Department of Commerce has received the grant. This variety of lead agencies shows increased collaboration across different government agencies with the corrections and juvenile justice arms of the government. The fiscal year 2015 solicitation has some notable changes from previous years, and here are a few of the more significant changes. The award period has been extended to 3 years. In the past, many programs have struggled to get programs implemented in a timely manner for various reasons. This can include, having to go through contract approval processes and accessing funds. Additionally, some programs in the past have expressed concerns that 1 year was not enough time to provide training, post-release services, follow-up, and evaluate the success of their programs. This extended program period should allow for more planning time, sustainability planning, and time to follow up with participants and collect data on program outcomes. The time that the program can work with incarcerated individuals has increased from 6 to 18 months to 6 to 24 months prior to release. This allows for more time for training or to account for different early release policies that may be impacted by the participation in the program. This solicitation, another change is how the solicitation deals with internet access. The solicitation encourages the use of internet as a tool to support education, training, and job development for participants. However, the use and availability of internet is not required in the proposed programs. Post-release services have increased to a maximum of 12 months after release, allowing for more intensive follow-up for individuals seeking or who have gained employment or need additional support. Additional priority considerations have also been added, including the use of effective employability assessments and partnerships with educational institutions. And these priority considerations are going to be explored further later in the presentation. So here are a few of the logistics for this particular grant. The submission deadline is May 19th at 11:59 p.m. Applicants must register with grants.gov prior to submitting their application, and you must receive a successful validation message from grants.gov to know that your application was successfully transmitted. BGA encourages applicants to submit their application 72 hours in advance of the deadline, which will allow time in case there's any technical issues with the submission of the application. Apologize. So the eligibility of this grant is states, units of local government, territories, and federally recognized Indian tribes. The award amount is up to $750,000 to up to 5 awards. And as I mentioned before, the award length has been increased as a 36-month project period. You'll find at the bottom of the screen a link to the actual solicitation, which goes into all of this information in a lot more detail. Now we're going to move into discussing some of the program requirements and expectations. Mandatory requirements are what's required in the program proposal to be considered for the award. The partnership with a training entity is an entity that is providing the training either directly to the program participants or to the instructors hired for the program. When talking about this partnership, discuss whether the training is accredited in some way and or does it prepare participants to continue the education after they've been released. A good example of this is a past grantee in Louisiana, which has a program where participants spend 6 weeks in an intensive training course, and once they've completed and been released, once they've completed this program and been released, they have 1 year's worth of coursework in that particular program if they decide to continue with it at the local community and technical college. So they can continue in that program having a year under their belt. The next requirement is the technology-related job training. And this is the real backbone of the program. It's the specific training you're proposing to provide. Include in your presentation the rationale for choosing this training, including evidence that there is a demand for that type of labor in the areas where the participants will be returning once they're released. The next requirement is focusing on moderate to high risk individuals in your target population. So when identifying your target population, it should be those with the greatest need. And research has shown that those individuals at moderate to high risk to reoffend are the ones with greatest need. This should be determined using a risk assessment tool that has been validated on the population you're planning to serve or a similar population. You can find more information on validated risk assessment tools at the NRRC website, which Angela mentioned earlier in the presentation. Be sure to identify the tool that you're going to be using when you apply for the program. And that tool could be something that's used by the correctional partner or by program staff. You'll also want to explain your capacity for working with the number of individuals you're proposing to serve. The next mandatory requirement is around providing a baseline recidivism rate. This will be the rate that you are going to compare your program participants' recidivism to. It's recommended to identify the rate for the general population as well as the rate for your target population. For example, if your program is focused on women with a high risk to reoffend, what is the recidivism rate in your area for women with a high risk to reoffend if you have access to that data? Additionally, the definition of this rate should match the definition you use to track recidivism of your participants. For example, if the baseline recidivism rate is defined as any individual who has a reconviction or technical violation within 1 year of their release date, your program should be looking at that same information for your program participants. Next is regarding access to internet. As I mentioned before, this is encouraged to support the educational and employment goals of your program. However, it's not required that participants have access to the internet. You'll see under this bullet point, there's a link to the Interagency Reentry Council's Mythbusters page on using technology inside correctional settings, and that page can be really helpful when determining how to incorporate information technology in your program. The last two mandatory requirements are individualized reentry and case management plans and collecting and reporting data. Those individual plans should reflect the needs of the program participant as identified by those risk assessments, and reentry plans should begin before release and be reviewed and revised throughout the course of the participant's involvement in the program. And the last mandatory requirement is the ability to collect and report on data for your program. That includes post-program employment outcomes and recidivism data. The technology element of this grant is broadly defined in the solicitation, and you'll see on this table we have some examples that are presented in the BJA solicitation, such as computer programming and green technology-related jobs. But there's also some examples on the right-hand side from past grantees. So that includes Microsoft Office training, IT essentials, heavy equipment operator, and maintenance. Next is priority considerations. So these are some elements that can help bolster your application if incorporated into your proposed program. Consider reviewing evidence-based practices in job training and utilizing a job-driven checklist as identified in the resources posted on this slide. We're also going to provide these resources at the end of the presentation. Other considerations include reentry career planning as intensive post-release services, formal employer and educational partnerships, programs that include industry-recognized certifications and/or licenses, training to employers around hiring and working with program participants, and leveraging resources to develop a sustainable program. The target population for this grant is moderate to high-risk individuals, as mentioned before, who are currently incarcerated, and that can include juveniles, adults, or both. They need to have been convicted or adjudicated and have 6 to 24 months prior to release to take part in the program. Excuse me. All right, the next portion of the presentation, I'm going to turn over to Andre Bethea at BJA.
Thanks, Roni. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this webinar on careers tech. I'm going to continue with the agenda and with the section that highlights program requirements and expectations. So we want to go straight into the allowable uses of funds. Keep in mind, everyone, that employability or job readiness assessments can be purchased, can be had by this particular opportunity. Of course, classroom occupational training. We also allow career counseling and work-based learning. And more importantly, we would love to see more people focus on the basic skills with like adult basic education, English as a second language, job readiness training, and the necessary equipment that goes into participating and completing a program of this magnitude. Next. Also on our long list of allowable uses of funds, the technology and structures that are necessary to build in the job/career experience, the recruiting, training, and supervising mentors included in peer mentors, reentry planning, case management, and post-release services for a maximum 12-month period, collection, tracking, and reporting performance measure data. The CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy that changes criminogenic thinking. And lastly, we also encourage the use of resources for civil legal aid. Next. Now we're going to get into the topic that everyone loves, performance measurements. Applicants that receive funding under this solicitation must provide data to measure the results of their work done under this solicitation. Post-award, recipients will be required to submit quarterly performance metrics. Quarterly reports are submitted through BJA's online performance measurement tool, PMT. At the bottom, you will see the website and the link to PMT. That is very important for all applicants to know that data is of the utmost importance of the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Next. Now we're shifting in the agenda. We're moving to the application and selection criteria. Next. The project abstract. Applications should include a high-quality project abstract that summarizes the proposed project in 400 words or less. Project abstracts should be written for a general public audience, submitted as a separate attachment, single space using a standard 12-point font with 1-inch margins. At the bottom of the page, there is a template. There's a link to a template for the project abstract. Next. The selection criteria will be based on weight. The statement of the problem is 10%, project design and implementation 40%, capabilities, competencies, and collaboration 25%, plan for collecting the data required for performance measures and sustainability 15%, budget 10%. Next. Statement of the problem. We're going to go through each one that's required and that is required for the selection criteria. The statement of the problem. Describe the challenges of providing technology-based training for residents returning to the community from incarceration. Provide an assessment of the local demand for employees trained in the targeted technology-related job sector and the geographic areas to which program participants are likely to return. Indicate the jurisdiction or tribal community to be served, including the facility where programming is proposed to occur. Summarize the status and job placement outcomes of any existing job training initiatives. Describe the equipment, facility, security, and personnel needs required to successfully execute the proposed training program. Next. Program design and implementation. Identify the goals and objectives for your program development, implementation, and outcomes. Describe process or plan for identifying, referring, and assessing potential participants. Highlight the incorporation of evidence-based programs or practices. Describe in detail how the mandatory requirements and priority considerations have been met. Describe in detail how proposed activities fall within the allowable uses of award funds. Next. Include a curriculum that helps participants acquire and develop skills needed to build potentially successful careers in technology-related jobs. Incorporate the following activities. Address skills and competencies demanded by the targeted technology career. Support participants' career advancement, and where applicable, attainment of a recognized certificate, degree, and/or license. Next, now we're going to look at the capabilities, competencies, and collaboration. We want you to describe the management structure and staffing of the project, identifying the agency responsible for the project and the grant coordinator. Demonstrate the capability of the lead organization and collaborative partners to implement the project, including gathering and analyzing information, developing a plan, evaluating the program, and resumes for key personnel. Describe how the project would be organized and staffed to meet each of the requirements. Next, describe in detail the public and/or private partners with which the applicant will work collaboratively. Demonstrate partners can provide resources, expertise to the project, are willing to support high-risk individuals through the learning and job training process and with post-release services. Include evidence of these partnerships. Next, the data collection and sustainability. We want to emphasize that you describe the process for assessing the project's effectiveness through the collection and reporting of the required performance metrics data. Outline what data and information will be collected and describe how evaluation and collaborative partnerships will be leveraged to build long-term support and resources for the program. Describe how performance metrics will be documented, monitored, and evaluated, and identify the impact of the strategy once implemented. Identify what data elements and information will be collected and a description of how evaluation and collaborative partnerships will be leveraged to build long-term support and resources for the program. Discuss how this effort will be integrated into the applicant's justice system plans or commitments, how the program will be financially sustained after federal funding ends, and the expected long-term results for the program. Next, the budget. Complete, cost-effective, and allowable. Applicants must budget funding to the travel to the Department of Justice sponsored grant meetings. Applicants should estimate the cost of travel and accommodations for 3 staff persons to attend 2 meetings in Washington, D.C. Matching funds are not required. Indicate any cost sharing agreements within the budget section. Next, and now I'm going to pass it back on to Ronin for the remainder of the webinar.
Thank you, Andre. All right, we're going to talk about some of the resources and some important contacts regarding this grant solicitation, and then we'll move on to a question and answer session. So these resources are available in the solicitation document itself. I'm just going to briefly review some of these. The Integrated Reentry and Employment Strategies white paper was a collaboration between the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Council of State Governments Justice Center, focusing on strategies for providing employment services for populations reentering the community from incarceration. The Office of Justice Programs, crimesolutions.gov, is a resource of different evidence-based programs that could be useful when deciding what services and programs to provide in your program. The What Works in Reentry Clearinghouse is a website that's managed by the Council of State Governments Justice Center and provides information about different programs around the country that have been successful and some that have had challenges, and the details about what elements are working and what elements are not. The Ready to Work Job-Driven Training and American Opportunity and the What Works in Job Training, a synthesis of the evidence, are both resources that are mentioned directly in the in the priority consideration section of the solicitation. Both provide very good information about evidence-based practices in job training. And the last resource on here is Reducing Recidivism and Improving Outcomes for Youth in the Juvenile Justice System. This is another white paper that was released by the Council of State Governments Justice Center, focusing on providing services to youth. One reason it's included in this presentation is technology career training grants can be awarded to youth-focused organizations as well as adult-focused, and the information in this paper can also be applied to emerging adults or transitional-age youth, typically individuals 16 to 24 years old. It talks about very important strategies for working with that population, including taking a developmentally appropriate approach to the services that are provided. But definitely encourage anyone who's interested in applying for this grant to take a look at these different resources. As far as some important context to be aware of, for application submission technical assistance, there's a customer support hotline for grants.gov. The number is listed there. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's also an email, support@grants.gov. The next one is Solicitation Assistance Contact Information. That's the National Criminal Justice Reference Service Response Center. Their hours and phone number are listed there, as well as their email address. Now we're going to move on to the question and answer session. I will hand that over to Angela Tolosa.
Great, thanks Reneen, and thanks Andre. This is a really helpful presentation on the solicitation, specifically because it has several different nuances that compare and contrast to last year's solicitation. So we're going to start on doing our Q&As now. So first Q&A that I wanted to, or question from the field, regards to how do you imagine the new project period, which is 36 months, how do you imagine this impacting implementation of this grant award? Andre, could you talk to us about how this program period of 36 months is going to be impacting implementation of the award?
Sure, Angela. So I want to respond by saying that the 36 months is to allow for more planning, more time in developing. Speaking from experience, that it takes time to bring about impact into a correctional setting, but more importantly, you want to know that it's going to work and that it's sustainable. So we here at BJA thought, why not expand the time? It also gives you more time to record more data, to be more selective about the participants, and to give time for success rates and success stories.
Excellent. Thank you, Andre. Another question we have that relates to the types of training, the types of programming that are funded by this grant. Ronnie, could you talk about, in your experience as a technical assistance provider, what types of technology-related job training programs have been funded through Second Chance Act?
Sure. So there have been a lot of different types of programs that have used this funding. So some examples, I mentioned some earlier, but some examples include training individuals on Microsoft Office and receiving certifications, from Microsoft on the use of their different programs. Heavy equipment operator training, which involves using construction technology such as bulldozers, cranes, other forms of heavy metal equipment. Green technology job training was something that was used a lot more in some of the earlier grant cohorts. And there's a lot, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of diversity and variety in what technology can mean. Something else to consider when forming your program is technology careers could also involve the technology component of another field. So manufacturing could be within the field of manufacturing, some of the training could be working on the equipment that is used for manufacturing to repair that equipment, not necessarily the actual manufacturing itself. Also, IT essentials, wiring. There's a wiring program called C-Tech that a number of grantees have used in the past. So those are a few examples of different technology career training programs.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Next question, and then we'll get to one of the big questions that a lot of folks have asked. As far as program evaluation and performance measurement, is an independent program evaluation a requirement of the grant? Andre, could you speak to that as far as what is required on program evaluations as part of this grant?
Sure, Angela. We want to know that while program evaluation is not mandatory for this particular solicitation, it is a priority consideration. So for those applicants who want to be a part of that priority consideration, it would be fitting to allocate funds for an independent evaluator to be a part of your program experience.
Okay, thanks, Andre. Okay, another big sort of swath of questions regards the clarification of the issue of internet access for inmates or participants in the program. One of the attendees asked and said, the solicitation states this is a mandatory requirement, but can you please clarify what it means if this is a mandatory requirement to provide internet access? First, I was thinking Andre could talk about the solicitation end, and then Ronin can also talk about it as a TA provider, what he's seen in the field. So Andre, can you clarify for folks what does the internet access provision actually speak to in the solicitation?
Sure, Angela. So I'm going to look at the solicitation on page 5 where it says, provide access to the internet by incarcerated persons as appropriate while protecting public safety. The key here is to familiarize yourself with the mythbusters, to familiarize yourself with what works in job training, to look at what is happening throughout the field. If, in fact, you are unable to provide the internet access, that does not preclude you from being an applicant for the Career Techs Grant. Ronan, take it away.
Yes, Ronan, could you describe a little bit about what are some examples of how internet access or internet-based programming can be used and what would be considered appropriate and what is not necessarily specifically necessary for the program?
Sure. So there have been some grantees that have used internet in the past in different ways. One in particular that I'm thinking of, they contracted with an online educational institution to provide online coursework for the juveniles that they were serving. However, instead of it being an open internet access, they incorporated it into the servers. It's a little technical, but they incorporated it into the servers at their facility so that it was essentially an intranet that was only accessible by the students in the program and the staff who were administering the coursework. So it wasn't open internet. They couldn't access regular websites. They could only access the coursework being piped in through their educational partner. That's one example. I know of other correctional institutions that have given internet access to program participants for, again, for online coursework or for testing for certifications. Again, there were firewalls. Some of them had firewalls in place. Some of them it was just restricted to the testing website, and some of them it was just very well monitored internet access. I would say I don't know of anyone who had a completely open internet access situation where participants could go to any website. There always tended to be some kind of privacy controls implemented into it, but there's definitely some variety in what different grantees have done in the past.
Thanks, Ronin. And so just to be clear, Andre, if for someone who asked, are grantees disqualified to apply if they do not currently provide internet access to participants, what would be the response?
Angela, the response would be that they are not disqualified.
Great, thank you so much. So internet access is not mandatory, but being provided, when appropriate, if appropriate, per with keeping public safety concerns in mind is allowed, right? That would be an interpretation. Next question I have regards as far as the process for the solicitation. Andre, wanted to see as far as whether or not the submission process, would you imagine that the deadline would be moved to a later date, or is May 19th the current and final submission deadline?
Sure, Angela. According to the deadline that's listed on the solicitation, May 19th, 2015 is the deadline for this particular solicitation.
Okay, thank you. As far as, we have some questions about risk assessment tools. I'm going to ask Roneen to help us with this. And Andre, after Roneen, I'll ask you please to add anything to it. We have a person who's asked, they're using a risk assessment tool that has been validated in-house. What needs to happen in order to document or show that their tool has been validated?
It depends on what you mean by validated in-house. I've heard different definitions of that before. So if you had an evaluation team, a research partner come in and actually do an evaluation of how the tool is being used with your population or the population in either your facility or your jurisdiction, depending on what population it was used on, then you'd want to provide the information from the evaluator on what that research process looked like and what the results were. If it was a homegrown tool that simply is being used on the participants, or I'm sorry, on the individuals in your cohort or in your jurisdiction, but it hasn't gone through a rigorous evaluation with an evaluation partner, then that's something that I don't believe would be considered. Something else to think about, just another note on validated risk assessments. The process of validation can definitely take time and be costly. If you're able to do it on your specific geographic area, that's amazing, and that's really helpful. However, not everyone can accomplish that. If you find a tool that has been validated on a similar population or a similar area, that would also qualify as a validated risk assessment for this project, as far as I'm aware. And one thing that I would suggest checking out for more information on this, the CSG Justice Center website, csgjusticecenter.org, has information on risk assessments and different tools that have been validated, and information on how they were validated, who validated them, what populations they were used on. Because something else to think about is different tools for youth versus adults, and different, urban versus rural populations and that sort of thing. So I would definitely go to our website and in the search bar, if you type risk assessments or validated risk assessments, you should be able to find some more information on that. Also, a quick note: we will post our websites again at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Renee. Andre, would love to see if you can answer this question for us. One of the attendees asked is whether or not the grant fund should be used for only pre-release training, or if it can also be used for post-release training or post-release completion of coursework.
I believe I want to definitely speak to this problem. I've noticed that this has been coming up through my email as well. We want to encourage for the applicants to use the funds for pre and post-release. I think we also encourage that through the extension of the programming, not just from 6 to 12 months as it had been in previous years, but from 6 months to 36 months, thus giving you time to really build a robust program that would allow you to track individuals on the pre-release side and then to successfully record how their experiences are post-release.
Thank you. We also have a question here, and perhaps, Andre, you can answer about about a couple different resources that have been listed as part of the priority consideration elements. So one of the attendees asked, can you please explain the priority consideration, which is asking for projects to apply evidence-based practices provided in what works in job training, a synthesis of evidence, and apply a job-driven checklist that includes essential parts of job-driven training. Could you just speak a little bit about these resources and what you would advise applicants to do in order to show that their projects are using these resources?
Great. I want all applicants to know that we here at BJA have provided you with the best recommended research that we can find in the solicitation. So on page 5 of the solicitation, where we talk about what works in job training, a synthesis of the evidence, and on page 6 of the solicitation, where we talk about ready to work, job-driven training, and American opportunity, we want you to be able to examine those particular research papers and apply it to your particular region. Different regions have different types of available job opportunities. Therefore, it is the evidence-based practices that will be what is the eye candy, or that gets the eye of the reviewers who are looking at your proposals. So if we encourage it, it's there for you to use. We trust that you would apply it to your proposals, to what you have in your projects, and therefore have a better sense of what we here at BJA are looking to fund in the field.
Thanks, Andre. This is Ronin again. I wanted to just follow up. I believe he mentioned it, but page 6 of the solicitation, which continues listing those resources, also has some bullet points. It's a good place to reference some of the information that Andre was just mentioning about specific items from these 2 resources that you can use in your proposal. But as Andre mentioned, each of these papers have very well-researched evidence-based practices that different government departments have come together to say are good, a good practice, best practice for this field. So I echo what Andre was saying. I definitely encourage you to look into those as a part of your program.
Thank you. Another question. As far as cohort sizes or minimum number of participants, is there something that is listed or preferred as far as a minimum number of people to be served under the grant? Andre, would you be able to answer that, please?
Yes, so there is no minimum or maximum number of program participants that needs to be served. I think as you the applicant begin to build your project and you start to decide how much funding will be required to facilitate your entire operation, you have to begin to look at the numbers that you feel that your program could reach. Realistically, you are to definitely get a recidivism baseline, and that's required in terms of looking at your locality, looking at your state. And however, in terms of the actual participants in your program, the solicitation does not indicate that you need a minimum or maximum number of persons served.
Thank you. Ronin, could you speak to, as far as what you've seen amongst grantees, what kinds of cohorts you've seen grantees serving, the range of it you can describe?
Absolutely. I would actually say there's quite the range. There are some programs that have tried to serve, now I'm trying to remember, but with the past solicitation, I should say, these were one-year programs. So you did get some variety based on their capacity. There were some programs that were trying to serve around 100 individuals in the course of a year. And then there are some programs, one in particular, a juvenile one, that was a much smaller scale, and their goal was to serve, I believe, around 12 to 24 participants over the course of a year. So there's definitely a range, while keeping in mind that this solicitation is a longer award period, so capacity might look a little bit differently now.
Thank you. Another pretty specific question for Andre. Does the applicant need to show or go through a procurement process in order to name a training entity on their proposal? Do you have to show the process of procurement or going through procurement or go through procurement?
That is a great question. On page 5 of the solicitation, at the very top bullet, there is a link to section 3.8 of the financial guide. We encourage all applicants to read that link and how procurement applies to funding from the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The bottom line is, if you are subcontracting $150,000 or more, then a procurement process is required.
Okay. Thank you. And at this time, it seems like there are no other new questions from the group. If anyone do have questions, you can feel free to reach out to us at CAC Justice Center or to folks at BJ or the other resources listed on the slide. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to speak with us today about the solicitation, and we're very excited about the ways that this grant will help to increase the vocational training and job placement opportunities for people returning to prison. If you have any other questions, please feel free to send us an email after you receive the webinar recording, and we can help you at that point. Thank you very much, Andre, for being on the webinar, and Ronin. And from this point, have a great day, everybody.